Thanks to Plyon for sponsoring this video and to Blackbird Interactive for providing a key to Crossfire Legion. Hello everyone, Lore Master of Sotek here, and I've got something a little different for you guys today, as I'm sure you've noticed by the description and title and everything. I was sent a copy of the game Crossfire Legion to try out, which I said, sure, why not? You know, I've got the time. So I took a look at it and saw that the game has been in early access for a while. It started early access back in May, and it's been through quite a few iterations and updates with community involvement, something that I'm sure a lot of us are familiar with Mortal Empire and beta right now, and has now graduated to a full release. So I decided to pop into the game and try it out, see what it was, and kind of tell you my thoughts on it. Just a couple of notes before we kind of dive into the real gameplay. The game does have quite a few things to do in it. There's a level editor that you can boot up when starting the game. There's a Steam workshop that's going to allow players to continue to add their own form of content. There's an official tournament support system when you open the game, kind of just right on the left, to allow people to get really into the competitive play. And it has numerous different match types that I was kind of messing around with, and some of them are actually pretty fun. There's, you know, kind of your standard system, which when we get into the gameplay, we'll talk about it, as far as like building bases, and then you run across the map and try to kill the enemy. But there's also different kind of matches that revolve around you and the enemy players competing over a notable objective in the center of the map. There's kind of like an auto chess. I don't know if that's the right term, but there's essentially a game mode where you and all the players, you spawn in units, and then the AI controls them, and they run at each other and are constantly pushing and pulling, and you're basically trying to, along with your allies, overwhelm the enemy and push them back to their base and kill them. And then there's what I can only refer to as like Footman Frenzy, which is a version where the game gives you units. You don't actually pick your own units. The game gives them to you, and your goal is to just slaughter the enemy as fast as you can. And the longer the game goes, the more powerful troops and the more troops you get, which is pretty awesome. There's also a version of the there's matches versus the AI, which are not traditional matches where you're trying to destroy a base, but instead it's basically a story mission that you're trying to accomplish a series of objectives, which we'll talk a little bit more about later. There's also quick matches for those who just want to do PvP and grind. As far as single player goes, there is a 15 mission campaign that is surprisingly high difficulty on the max setting. Like it kicked my ass a few times, and I feel pretty competent at games like this. But there are 3 playable factions, and as you play through all the acts, kind of like in classic Warcraft 3 style or StarCraft, you know, you get to play with each of the different factions in each act, and then the final act is kind of a mix and gets really crazy and difficult. But the story overall, it's pretty good. It's not the greatest story I've ever seen, but it does kind of have some fun twists and some moments where I kind of laughed out loud, just because there are some pretty good tropes that take place in it. But the cutscenes are beautiful. They're almost like a hand-drawn kind of painted style almost, but they're very, very pretty. And the voice acting is solid. Like, it's a little hammy, but it's a good time. But the campaign is genuinely, in my opinion, the best aspect of the game. It's extremely fun, and I've already put in about 5 hours into it. I'm still not done with it yet. I'm slowly getting there. I suspect it's probably gonna take me 7 to 8 to finish it on the highest difficulty. But yeah, they require quite a few different tactics. Not all of them give you a base. Sometimes you're given just a selection of units and you have to try and survive to the end. Sometimes it's about taking out certain targets or avoiding certain things, or just trying to survive for a certain amount of time, or escort missions. Pretty good mix. The game has continued to surprise me in many positive ways, with notably difficult AI and missions that can present unique challenges. I genuinely only have about 2 gripes with the game, which are that the custom battle mode requires at least 2 players to really function, which can be a bummer if you don't find anyone willing to join your matches. Like, you just can't do anything if it's just you. The cooperative mode, which I mentioned kind of earlier, is really fun because they're like story missions, and you can have up 3 people on your team, and they have all sorts of stuff like, do this objective before the timer ticks down. Meanwhile, there's like a territory that if you drive into it before completing a side objective, you get this absolute hell blown out of you, or you suddenly have to go embark on a quick escort mission while simultaneously defending your base. Like, they're really fun. I just wish I could play them by myself instead of needing another person. My only other gripe is that you don't get your entire roster in a match regardless of what faction you play. Currently you have a set of roles, and basically before the match begins, you select which unit from a little list of 2 to 4, is going to fulfill that role, which I would personally rather have my entire roster available. However, I will admit that it does really add some fascinating tactics and strategy that you have to deal with before the battle to try and figure out what units are best to take to deal with your enemy. For instance, as New Horizon, for my light infantry melee, my light infantry unit, will I take the melee focused vampires or the heavy energy cannon blasting minotaurs? Vampires are excellent at leaping through enemies to get into the back line and tear apart enemy infantry while regenerating their shields through combat, but they're completely useless against air units and vulnerable to heavily armored or swift foes like most vehicles. The Minotaur, on the other hand, is perfect for obliterating flying units and heavier vehicles, but is far more vulnerable to being overwhelmed by mass infantry and cannot regenerate their shields, nor have near as good of AoE. Will I use my light air slot unit to take Karen so I can detect stealth enemies? Or will I risk being more vulnerable to stealth and instead take the Griffin for its elite ability to absolutely obliterate enemy flyers, even though it cannot attack ground units? So perhaps instead I should focus on a more universal Pegasus, which can use an active ability to switch between the ability to attack ground or air units. Or I could even acquire another support unit instead by taking the Siren, as it focuses on snaring enemies to root them in place, and it can even unleash an energy field that deals damage over time to people standing in it. And that's just 2 of the 9, I think, slots available to every faction. And that includes having to choose between 3 heroes that provide different global powers along with their own unique abilities and gimmicks on the battlefield, though that seems to be exclusive to single player. The heroes, unfortunately, in multiplayer don't seem to actually be summonable, whereas in single player in the campaign, they are actually running around the battlefield and have some cool abilities. But in multiplayer, they just give you different global buffs, which are still huge. Like, they make a massive impact on how you're going to play your faction and also what units you should take, because each of them kind of specialize in different strategies. Overall, I must say I really enjoyed this game. I'm not ashamed at all to say that I walked into it with really very little expectations and was just kind of like, yeah, whatever, like someone wants me to check out the game, sure, I can do that. And I just continued to get happier and just more pleasantly surprised with every hour that passed, because I just kept discovering something new and going, oh, that's cool, or oh, I love that, or like, oh man, I haven't had a game like this in way too long. But in any event, thanks again to Plyon for sponsoring this video and to Blackbird Interactive for the key to try out their game. Now, if you excuse me, I have a campaign to finish. Hopefully this video will have little clips of me enjoying various moments in the game, and I hope you all will consider checking out and enjoy those little things. So thank you again for watching. I'll see you next time. Bye-bye.